this one, I suppose I can. Yeah. So it is, thank you. So, hello everybody. It is great you have an app with which you can generate automatically the start slide. And I use it from the app, not from the event, and this is great. So it is not an intelligent app, so maybe this is a talk for, or a topic for a different talk. What does it mean, intelligent, in that sense? But I will be talking about intelligent, intelligent, artificial intelligence and ethics, so the relation between the both. I want you to take this with a grain of salt, because I am not an ethicist, so I'm not a philosopher. I come from the AI community, so it means I will be talking about topics I am not an expert in, but I think it is interesting from the point of view of, coming out from a community more than 30 years and looking for what other communities, what other topics are important to the community I am in. And this was actually the way I came to dive into ethics and ethics of artificial intelligence. This is one of the graphics, one of the researchers of the AI Now Institute tweeted a couple of years ago, all the pushback against artificial intelligence, all the things that happened in the world, in some companies, and so on, against the use of artificial intelligence, against companies using artificial intelligence, and so on. There were a lot of walkouts. There were also papers and tweets and people reporting biases and discrimination, etc., in only 1 year. So you see only 1 year here. That time, coming from the artificial intelligence community, it was for me a shock. Because, okay, you think you are doing great things, and then it comes, not 1 day, not 2 days, but every day, and the intensity with which it is coming in the last years, it is actually too much. And then you think about, well, what is what we are doing bad? What is what maybe we have to take into account? What is happening? And this is only 1 year, as I told. This is only 1 year. So most of the things comes this way because if you don't have an ethical system, if you don't have an ethical company that complies and that respect ethical aspects and so on, you cannot have ethical products. So this is something that was a discussion in a workshop, as part of a workshop I was participating 3 years ago. And it was so clear. Okay, and this is related to trust. So how can I trust a company that put into the world products that discriminate someone? And maybe this is, in the void, discriminate. Well, it was not me. But what if it is you, the person that is discriminated against? What if it is you, the one that doesn't have or doesn't become a credit to buy a house, to buy a car? What if it is you, the one that is in the airport, and then you have to come here because there is some problem, because maybe the autonomous algorithm is trained with photos from people that it is not you, and then you are misclassified in some category and so on. So maybe if it does not happen to you, okay, it can happen when it was only 1 or 2 people, but when it is you, then you start to think differently. And I think one of the most simple things is to put yourself in the shoes of the other people in order to try to understand how do these people feel when such things happen. And it was something that it was happening to me all the time. Well, what if it were myself, my kids, which are in that position, when they are discriminated against, when they cannot get to school and so on, because the system determined, no, this is what happens. So this is a very brief introduction to think about the other aspects that maybe you don't find in the papers. It is this putting yourself in the shoes of the others. Maybe it has more to do with traditions, with the society you live in. Maybe some communities think more about the others than others, and maybe some communities think more about the others when they are told you have to think more about the others. So it is not only ethics what the talk is about and also what is happening. So it is also about standards, principles, laws, values, guidelines, recommendations, culture, history, and so on. There is a lot going on. And of course, you don't find an expert which is expert in all the topics at the same time. So there is a need for multidisciplinarity nowadays, which is very important, which not all the people coming from the AI community want to talk about. Maybe I am one of the rare exceptions that trying to go out, this is what we're talking about before, trying to find a way so that the special, the expertise in one area can be more expertise, actually because you are also a generalist at the same time. So trying to understand more about your community when you go out and see other communities. So what comes now is a sequence of different, slides, of course, but of different papers, of different recommendations, and of different articles, where I think you maybe want to take a look at, because this maybe can help you in your work, in your research, and so on. One of them is this from the Alan Turing Institute, from David Leslie, Understanding Artificial Intelligence Ethics and Safety. And I chose that because of the word understanding. So one of the most important things is trying to understand something. And for that, definitions are important. So in the other talks, we had the topic of definitions. In AI, more than 500 definitions I have actually dealt with, and it is a mess. So if everybody defines differently things, and you said trust is trust, then you have a problem, because you will always have a different perspective. But at the same time, maybe it is not the best thing to have only one definition, because depending on the context, maybe you have to consider something else. So you will have to find a balance, but all that of definitions, like the word definition says, it is trying to understand what the people defining something says in order to have a conversation, to communicate, to work together with other people that don't understand or don't know about the concept. So understanding is very important. And in this guide from Leslie, so you have different, introduction to the topic, definitions, and so on, but also different principles, different values, context, and also a couple of, standards that help you consider ethics in AI, or how to consider ethical aspects in AI. And one of them, it is in general, so the AI ethics is nothing else as this set of values, principles, techniques that can be then applied in order to find standards, or in order to decide what is right or wrong, according, or in some context, or according to some situation, and so on. And he, for example, has such a framework where you, on the one hand, need to know about the values. Which are the values you are trying to consider in order to, this is SUM, so in order to support, on the right, motivate, for example, respect human values, or respect human rights, or care for patients, or care for people when they are in problems, or to protect people from being, discriminated against, etc. So the first thing are the values that determine the objectives of the framework you want to apply. Then you come to the principles. So which are the principles? Which is what make your project or problem or situation or algorithms, etc., vulnerable in some way. For example, it is fair or it is accountable. It is someone there that can take responsibility when something goes wrong. It is sustainable. Is it transparent? And these are the principles then you evaluate according to the values that are important to you. And then you start a process in how to implement that, which is then related to the governance of the framework. I find it very useful because it concentrates in one place everything, or almost everything, what you need to take into account. So values, principles, and then how to implement that, how to do that. And this is also a very, very telling slide, or a very telling graphic from this guide, which, in other words, you have to reflect, you have to ask whether a question has a purpose or not, or you have to assess the impact of what you are doing, so you have to reflect about that. Then according to that, then you will have to act, so to do something against or to ensure something or to design the graphical user interface, maybe not with this, but with something else, so you have to be active, or you have to behave, or you have to consider something, and then you have to justify also, so to set up the processes. Maybe you have to change some processes happening in the company in some other way according to that. And then you go in a cycle, so you reflect again about the consequences, about whether this was useful or not, and so on. And this is actually how you put the platform in work. There are a lot of other different, very, very important documents. And this, for example, for Leslie, takes into account different principles, ethical principles. And one of the bases of all these ethical principles, documents and reports and so on, is the human rights. Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so are based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This has been also the basis for all the different articles and reports from the high-level group, AI high-level group from the European Union, and they have produced a lot of different documents, very, very useful, that have also been starting point for the work of other communities, of other groups. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because there is explicitly defined which are the rights we have, and it is not something we have to ask, or we maybe could have depending on some situation, but these are the rights we have. So we don't need to ask whether we can. We can. These are the rights. And according to the country or the region or etc. you live in, then they are considered differently, as you already know. Two of the articles from 32 of them say the following: so everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration. Everyone, everybody, everyone, without distinction of any kind. And this is very important. It doesn't depend whether you are from this community, from this minority, etc. Everyone is entitled to the rights. The second one, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Okay, this is a right we have. However, with some AI tools, when they, for example, are used by the police, and they maybe with some face recognition system, we have seen this in the news, because they were not trained with a variety of data from minorities, etc., they, of course, then, not of course, but we have had examples where by using these tools, innocent people have been put in jail and were arbitrarily arrested. By using an AI tool, arbitrarily arrested, and this is violating their rights, because the algorithm said so. One of the guidelines for trusting AI, or for trustworthy AI, is from the European Union. So it's one of the ones that worldwide has been working on this thematic. It doesn't mean that ethics and AI or the combination exists since 5 years. It exists since a lot of decades, but now it is where we are seeing, of course, more work in this regard. And this one is especially, so the ethics guidelines not only define what is meant by trustworthy AI, but also base everything around 7 principles or 7 requirements for being or for having trustworthy AI or program or algorithm or product, etc., based on AI or that uses AI. Not everything what she's called AI uses AI, by the way. But well, these seven requirements are human agency and oversight, so taking control, or having control about the tools, technical robustness and safety, privacy and data, and so on. So transparency, you maybe already know them from the news, from the work, and from papers in the last years. Very, very important as and used by a lot of all different groups working in this thematic. These 7 requirements, so this is one of the graphics from the report, or around to the processes that should be taken into account to put this in the tools, or to consider this in the tools, or to evaluate in the tools, and so on. And sometimes, and they write this in the report, you have maybe contradictions. So if you maybe want to transparent product, maybe this is in some contradiction with accountability. Or maybe it is, or it has some contradiction with robustness. You cannot apply this to all the systems. And if you want to apply it to all the systems, circumstances, or situations, maybe you cannot be transparent enough. And this is normal. So they tell, okay, you have to consider, but you have to have a balance so that it is also transparent in some way, and you have to try to find ways to make it transparent anyway, even when robustness is your first core principle you want to take into account. And because it was a question before, so why trustworthy? So what are the 3 components of all that? So it should be lawful. It should be compliant with the law. And this is very important with the regulations, maybe from the country, from the area, from the world. So also, this is why one of the reasons the Declaration of Human Rights is taken into account. It should be ethical, and it should consider ethical principles. They put 7 ethical principles, they are much more, and it should be robust, so from the technical perspective and also from the social perspective. No? And these 3 components, general components, are the ones that tells you, okay, it is an AI you could trust, or it is trustworthy. And they also have some processes, so this was also in the report. Once you have the principles, the right requirements, and so on, then you try to find the processes in order to put that into place. And it is also a cycle, which is very similar to how do you develop software. So you have to analyze situations, you have to come up with requirements you want to implement, then you want to design what you want to implement, then you develop the app, and then you use the app, you test the app. And so it is very similar. It is actually software. Artificial intelligence is nothing else than software. There is no magic inside. But in all the different phases of developing, testing, using, collecting data, everything, they say that you should consider ethical principles at all levels. And again, we cannot have an ethical principle if we don't have ethical principles also at the business perspective, at the business side. So it cannot be ethical if the company has unethical processes, for example. Based on that, they also wrote about recommendations. So recommendations, for example, for empowering, benefiting, protecting human beings, and in different contexts. So, for example, for academia and research, for the private sector, for the public sector, for the social society, and they put, so it is a very, very useful document also as guidelines. what they recommend how to put in practice what the guidelines for trustworthy AI. And also there is an assessment list which has almost 150 questions in order to operationalize that, so to make it easier. And there are some examples of these questions. For example, do you assess how your system behaves in unexpected situations and environments? So if not, then before you put your product out there, then try to consider different environments, try to simulate maybe with, I don't know, games and so on, or maybe in some different situations, and then try to assess whether or how your system behaved, and try then to consider how to do that, or how to do when there is something unexpected. How can you mitigate some problems and so on? So try to do that before putting this into the world and then having the problems too late when you don't or cannot have a solution for that. Another case of equation from that assessment list: in case the AI system features a chatbot or conversational system, are the human end users made aware of the fact that they are interacting with a non-human agent? So this is also very simple. So if you are interacting with Alexa, okay, tell Alexa it's not perfect. Alexa can also do some things wrong. Alexa is a technology, it's not a human, which is on the other side, and so on. So something like that. We have seen also a couple of examples how to put that evidently when we act and interact with such systems. And if you consider that, of course, then you can not say directly, and I am ethical or the product is ethical, but you consider such situations that make, of course, easier humans interacting with these technologies and also trusting them, which is the topic of this workshop. Another example, did you consider ways to develop the AI system or train the model without or with minimal use of potentially sensitive or personal data? So everything around data. If you are using data, anonymize it, also from minorities, in which way you use that, because of course, depending on how you train the model, then how will the model will behave in the future. And of course, if you don't train that with people of dark color skin, then of course, if you then have a system that should analyze skin in general, maybe it could have, and we have seen also that in the news, when it comes out, not every, so it is maybe the tip of the iceberg, what comes out in the news, what is not coming out in the news, and which is anyway happening. So this is also a way to verify, to account for that before the product is in production. And also another example, did you consider diversity and representativeness of users in the data? So similar to the topic before. Did you test for specific populations or problematic use cases? Do that, if not, before you sell the product and so on in other ways. No? So, and the last one I think here, did you put in place mechanisms that facilitate auditability of the system, internal in the company or external to independent actors? This is something that was not happening before. So we are seeing a lot of all these questions is actually revolutionizing the way software is produced, software is developed, and inserting in all those phases of the software development such cases that need to be taken into account. Because actually what makes us human makes us responsible or irresponsible. We have such flaws. We have also a lot of biases. The people that collect the data itself, the people that implement or code the system, the people that test that, the people that use it, and so on. So we have to take into account that are humans the ones that are using that. So this is also in a way, how to develop the practical guidelines from the IEEE, where you can also take a look at. So not surprisingly, they also have, of course, all the different principles that guide or that should guide the development of autonomous intelligence systems, and you see there are a lot of them that repeat themselves, so agency, data agency, human agency, transparency, accountability, human rights, and so on. So it is a way, the same, consider that, and more specifically here from the IEEE in the way how to develop the systems itself. Now. So the thing is to be responsible, so to be responsible, and responsible means in this way that you also need to have this trustworthy AI. So this is a condition to have responsible AI. And responsible AI is not responsibility of the machine, of the product, but the responsibility of the people dealing with the problem, with the product in all its stages. So sometimes when people see responsible AI, it's not the algorithms what we are talking about, it's all the processes and people related to the use, development, testing, implementation, design, etc. of the algorithm. So they are the humans, actually, the ones that need to be responsible. A couple of other articles, in case you are interested, this is only very, very fast. For example, this one that compared the landscape of AI ethics, and there were 84 different documents. So everybody is now talking about ethics and AI. And it looks like, something like sometimes I feel everybody needs to do that, and sometimes I feel too much people are doing that, and we need not only papers, we need also actions now. But this is very interesting. It compares 84 papers, and no single ethical principle was present in all the different ethical guidelines, but the ones that were more present were transparency, number 1, 70-something times from 84, and then justice and fairness, maleficence, responsibility, and privacy. And this is also another one which compares different ethical guidelines, but now from industry or from business practices. And again, no single principle was present in all the guidelines, but the ones that were more observed were fairness and accountability. So the product must be fair, and it must also be accountable. But now the question, the product or the company developing the product, or the people using the product, or the one that developed the product, or the one that collected the data, it is very difficult, and you have to take into account all that. Now it is in development. There is no a single answer. And the way the thing is then to develop responsible AI, there are a lot of different guidelines and so on. And some companies and at the universities or in academia in general, they are considering this more. So the body of work and papers and conferences in the last few years has exploded, which is a good thing, but we also need that it explodes too on the side of the products, on the people developing such products. So they are different, so I don't want you to understand all the graphics, but this is very, very old in software engineering, so the process of engineering requirements. And the one thing I want you to save or to remember is these are for responsibility, encompassing everything at all stages. Also here in the requirements development, in details when you elicit data, when you analyze the data, specify and validate data and so on. Responsibility, ethical principles in all the phases, also defining high quality requirements also in all the phases. And even if you work with Agile, where you maybe have user stories and not other kind of documentations, also be responsible trying to put the ethical principles in at all levels. So I get actually putting that in a backlog and doing the things, not only talking about that, but also implementing that, also considering that in all the phases. And actually, that's all. So being responsible, need responsible humans. And we will continue talking about responsibility, ethical AI, trust, etc. But if we don't put that in the backlog, if we don't do that, then we will continue talking, and we will still have systems that discriminate, and this is actually something that can endanger democracies and so on. So I think that's all. Yeah, that's the last slide. Thank you very much.
Can I just maybe add one single comment from the meta-analysis by Chauvin et al. They have 85 or 84 guidelines. One guideline is addressing the topic of overtrust. Side note.
So, we open the stage for some questions. Are there?
So you showed in the end a lot of processes where you should implement this. Do you have any experience on how to actually implement it in your process? What's the best way of having checklists? At what point in your development would you go through it? Is it the responsibility of the developer? Do you have an external person coming in and going on with these questions? Like, what is the way of implementing this so it's really happening, or enforcing the use of ethical AI?
Yeah, so it is not an easy question. For example, we have a paper together with a researcher from a telecom in Germany, and they were then giving examples and explaining how they do that. And the first thing was, it is too difficult, that it is sometimes problematic, because developing a system is not only done by one person, so you have different teams, and maybe the people that develop the system are not the ones that test the product. Maybe there is a completely different department only testing the product that was developed. But also collecting the data and so on is not done by the people that implements the product. And you see here that it tries to put that in all the different phases of the development. And it is then very difficult to try to find how we do that. Okay, that's it. What this, for example, the assessment list tries to do is it is only 150 questions. There could be 1,000 questions. But what they are telling, in other words, is, and like also Gary books, one of the, Gary is not Gary, books is the family name. But he tells every line of code had ethical implications. So the way of doing that is reinserting different processes that were not or are not the processes the company used to have into account for developing a product, or inserting processes, maybe retrospectives, maybe meetings extra, or maybe at the beginning also when requirements are elicited, then after that analyzing the requirements, etc., then inserting maybe a workshop, or inserting or bringing in someone to the development team that have or know more about ethics and principles and so on, in order to discuss when the requirements are then put in the backlog, for example, if it is agile or something, or are distributed to the different sub-teams that are implemented, etc., to be there at the time, so that soon enough, at least some things are considered. That won't be enough, but then by testing, or when testing, also some guidelines, some questions, something that helps, then testing, and also taking into account other principles. Not only testing, for example, okay, the colors, contrast is this and that, and yes, this function does, when clicking, does that, but also consider then extra catalog of questions, other ways of analyzing how the system behaves, etc. Or when you are using the system, okay, it is some, I don't know, some organization that buys the product. I didn't develop it, but I buy the product, I use it, and which are the situations now? Situations where I will use the product, which could be maybe the implications of doing that. If it is for giving, I don't know, permission or to give credit to some person, okay, before I implement this in my system and do that automatically, then I try to evaluate whether this could be maybe a help before the decision is made, and someone from the institution then making the decision, the humans. So it is only then when there is no way of changing the system, because you only buy the system, have the system, and now but the situations where this should be applied should put there the system and let the system make the decisions autonomously, or should I go a step back and then to the department where decisions are approved, then have the tool in order to complement the decision-making process, and after that, then make it the decision. So it is very different in situations. Maybe you cannot do this with all the different single cases, but even for some of them, maybe you can step back and then try to evaluate that. But the best possible thing that can happen is soon enough. And soon enough is from collecting the data, from using data. Some data historically have a lot of different biases. Then considering that, is this data diverse enough? It considers this and that. If not, then I should then have but maybe we should do something else. Then we start a process of collecting other kind of data that is not in the data. And this, of course, means revolutionizing the process inside the conference. It means more work. It means more different processes, different people, but this is the only way that those processes will be trusted after that, will be used after that. This is the only way to go down with the different cases we already have had from the news mainly, but that discriminate people, for example, also from schools. What happens if my tool automatically say my kids cannot go to the university to this and that because of some variable, I don't know, something else. So when it's put into production, when it's there making the decision, it is too late. People will be affected, minorities will be affected, politics, countries, etc. will be affected. We have to step back. And this means we will always have work, the people working in AI and software engineering, because we have more work to do. That's actually done. Okay. It was a very long answer. You see, I am passionate about that, but it is putting that, actually doing the things, telling the things helps only partially. Yeah.
Just a comment as a follow-up. But
I was just that would make, if it fits also the panel discussion, you may want to wait for the specific.
Just a comment, but I can. I agree completely with the question and with the answer, because I was thinking, for example, with the example of unit testing and integration testing, it has to be done in different part of the. So I was thinking is really as a culture of a company itself, of the whole process, to have a checklist at any step of the way. As much as is a test, so a person that is responsible to empower this test to be due in different levels of the part. So it's a lot of a culture shift for the company, because it's also unit testing sometimes bothering people because slowing down the process, but has to be an account that is going to slow the process, but is a point of responsibility at any step. So each person has to be tell that you are responsible for something that will be in production and affecting people at any step of the way. So that's thank you.
It means a change in mentality, of culture, the company, etc. But it is needed.
It's needed. Yeah.